Well, hey, all you wiretappers. Good to be back here in the studio of Gangland Wire. This is Gary Jenkins, retired Kansas City Police Intelligence Unit detective with another story, and it's going to be about Kansas City. But it's going to be how Kansas City was really part of remember the big savings and loan debacle back in the 80s? Anyhow, we had a piece of that action here in Kansas City. Let's start off a little bit about the Kansas City mob family, which many of you guys may not know. Most of you probably do. Most of you guys, most of my guys that listen to this regularly, they know all about Kansas City. They know all about all the mob families. They like these kind of obscure stories that haven't been told and retold and retold. So my job is to continually try to find more of those stories. So this is one of them. Uh, we don't get, Michael DeLeonardo, we don't get John Gotti involved, but we've got a guy here in Kansas City that is a little known guy, but he made a lot of money for the mob. He was an interesting guy. Nick Civella has been the Kansas City mob boss, since let's say since 1957 or so. He was at Appalachian. They just didn't get caught at the meeting himself. He was down the road. He was at a train station a couple train stops away. Nick Civella, he didn't have any formal education, but he had a nose for good, big, sophisticated money-making deals. He knew an opportunity when he saw it. I was on this local podcast with a guy named John Termini, and he had Nick Civella's great grandnephew, or so I guess that's how you say it. It was Tony Ripe's grandson. Tony Ripe is Nick Civella's nephew. And his kid, Anthony Civella. And he told me, and he was talking, and he called him Zio, which is Italian for uncle. Said Zio plays chess while others play checkers, and that's true. I agree with that. Remember, Nick Civella's the guy that helped orchestrate that deal with the Teamsters pension fund to loan $62 million to a man named Alan Glick to purchase the Stardust and three other casinos. And Alan Glick, he was like a 32-year-old untested shopping center developer is all he'd ever done. Now, in exchange for that money that he was able to borrow from the Teamsters pension fund, he allowed them, that cartel of Kansas City, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Cleveland, he allowed them to put Lefty Rosenthal in the hotel, and then Lefty Rosenthal then put other people in the hotel and in the count room and in other areas of the hotel where they could then skim millions off the top of the casino receipts before the money even got counted. Now, do you recall the savings and loan scandals in the 1980s? I kind of do. And by this time, by the 80s, the trials, the skim trials were starting, and it was all exposed what they'd been doing. The Teamsters pension fund was under heavy federal scrutiny at the time. They'll eventually will put the Teamsters union into trusteeship, and the fund in trusteeship, and the government will help appoint new overseers and regulators, and they really monitor that closely. And so all those loan kickback schemes they had done for years are dried up. They're gone. Alan Dorfman's, who was their main guy in Chicago, the guy that really was integral to getting all these pension fund loans, he's been killed. My bosses are all going to jail. One of their other guys, Jackie Presser out of Cleveland, they find out he's been an informant and he's testifying. And Roy Lee Williams, who's a Teamster out of Kansas City, they got him on a case trying to bribe the senator from Howard Cannon, the senator from Nevada, with Joy Lombardo. He's going to jail, and he testifies about how the Teamsters had been controlled by the mob and by him and Cleveland and Milwaukee and Chicago. Now, if you remember in the 1970s, the feds raised interest big time on loans to combat inflation, when inflation was just out of control. If you were getting paid during the early 70s or middle 70s when inflation went out of control, you remember you got 10, 12, 15% increases in your paycheck. It was crazy. And I also remember paying, I think it was 12% maybe on my first home loan during those years. So that will slow inflation down. As inflation slowed down, then they wanted to generate new business in the lending industry, so the Fed started loosening their control on it. They had put a lot more controls on it with that much higher interest rate and other controls. They started loosening control on the lending institutions. Now, the mob is never going to sit on its hands when control is loosened, where there's a lot of money involved, whether it's casinos or banks or whatever. They see an opening. There's nobody watching the till, if you will, and nobody really monitoring the employees quite so closely. They're going to start trying to get their hands into it. Now, for example, kind of during that time, there was a small scheme in the Kansas City Bank at the Shawnee State Bank. Somebody in our local mob family compromised a banker at this bank. Pretty soon, policemen were in there and they saw these low-level mob associates just accidentally, and they called the FBI. A couple of low-level mob associates coming in and getting loans. So they started looking at it and started kind of watching the bank, and at the same time, we came up with some other information that they had compromised a guy, a bank officer at the Shawnee State Bank. So then pretty soon they opened up a whole investigation on it, and they found out that these guys were getting these loans. They'd pass some money along to somebody in the mob, take a little piece of the action themselves, and then they'd never pay it back. I mean, I understand it would ruin their credit, but see, they never had any credit when they went in there. These were guys that didn't have any credit when they walked in. They never should have gotten a loan. They end up taking everybody down on that. Shortly after that, there's another small bank in Kansas City, Kansas. It's called the Indian Springs State Bank. Now, Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas are like East St. Louis and St. Louis, just across the state line. They have a small bank in a shopping mall. These little strip mall banks called the Indian Springs State Bank. And the board kind of wants to, banking business is starting to go again and money is being loosened up. And they hired a small town Lexington, Missouri banker named William LeMaster. And he was told, he needed to save this bank and make it profitable. And he claimed that he could do that. Now, this small town guy, he's an older guy. He's been out here in Lexington since about 40, 50 miles out of Kansas City up along the Missouri River, real old town. And this guy, he was interesting in that he dressed like a Wall Street banker. He wore, kind of narrow ties and he looked like, and really good suits, like at that time, probably $500 suits and really good shoes. And he looked like a big city banker. One of his early moves was to hire a local man, a Kansas City criminal lawyer named Anthony Russo. And in contrast to Mr. Conservative dressing banker, Anthony Russo and quiet. Anthony Russo was loud. He wore double-breasted pinstripe suits. He wore ostentatious display of jewelry, big, big, heavy gold jewelry. I mean, he looked like a gangster. What can I say? He certainly looked like a mob lawyer, at least. I mean, on the TV, I realize people in real life aren't always like this, but he looked like what you would think a mob lawyer would look like. I suspect our friend Joe Lopez, the shark up in Chicago, was probably not like that. Bruce Cutler, he always wore really nice conservative clothes, and all those New York mob lawyers, and the real ones we had here. This guy was kind of a minor mob lawyer, shall we say. Anthony Russo had spent many years as a well-known criminal attorney. He was known by everybody in both sides of the state line, and power brokers and members of the mafia, and he had represented Nick Civella and some other people, not in any great big cases, but he had represented them. They trusted him. He had been the subject of a bribery investigation and actually had taken a conviction by this time. See, in the early 1970s, Kansas City, Kansas had a big increase in massage parlors that were really brothels. And Russo started out defending prostitutes as they were caught and make a case on a prostitute. And, he was one of those lawyers that would be down there at city court and get them a deal of some kind and take $500 in cash money, maybe even $1,000 back then. Another thing interesting about Russo, though, he was also the attorney for the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department's Fraternal Order of Police, so he knew all the cops, and our cops all liked him. Believe me, if you're in the FOP and you have a lawyer that works for you, then he's your go-to guy, and if he wants you to ask you about something, you're going to talk to him and try to try to get along with him, and maybe if he needs something, why at least try to help him out. Just one hand washes the other. It's kind of how it works. And as long as they don't ask you to do anything criminal, but sometimes they might. I never had that. We never really had this kind of a situation in Missouri, but in Kansas they did. Well, there was a pimp over there in KCK, or in Kansas City, Kansas, that was paying Rousseau to defend some of his girls. And he asked him, he said, "Hey, can you know cops, can you get a contact in the vice unit and see if we can't work something out? Come on, man." He said, "These guys are costing me money." Uh, so he also owned a massage parlor, of course. And Russo went to the head of the vice unit. He was a sergeant at the time, but kind of the stick. He'll go on up in rank, actually. And he went to him, and they ended up making a deal. And so by 1973, if the KCK vice unit was going to go out and hit some massage parlors this one particular night, then they would know that they were coming out, at least with his massage parlors. And the word started getting around, and somebody got caught. Somebody testified, and I can't even remember all the details of the case, but they got testified. They charged some policemen, and they charged Russo. The policeman got off, to be quite honest. If I remember right, the policeman got off, but Russo didn't. They went into federal court, and they convicted him of several counts. He got, I don't know, 3 or 4 years in prison. He served 16 months up at Leavenworth for bribery and interstate promotion of prostitution. And as a result of that, in order to not be disbarred, where maybe he could go back and get his license back, you can give up your law license for a period of time, and then if you have to go back, you want to go back and reactivate it. You can inactivate it, I think's the word. Then you reactivate. You got to go in and take some some CLEs, some continuing legal education classes, and then just reactivate your license. He gets hired. This LeMaster hires Anthony Russo. Bank regulators who were familiar with this. Russo was well known enough character in KCK that they're like, hey, and a simple investigation will reveal. You can go in and run Anthony Russo and KCK, and you can find out about all this bribery and prostitution thing today. And back then you couldn't run it in a computer, but you could find it out pretty easy. Probably just by reading the newspapers, you probably would remember the name or asking around. Found out about that. They did not locally. They denied approval for him to become a bank officer, but then they had to forward this. They aren't the final say so. They forwarded his application and the denial to Washington D.C. Well, the FDIC Board of Review overruled the local investigators and approved this convicted felon, mob associate Anthony Russo, to serve as an officer at the Indian Springs State Bank. They did add a restriction that said his duties should be limited to new business development, which means he's like a salesman. He goes out and knocks on doors, goes to businesses, joins Rotary, gets to know other business people he already knows, and says, "Hey, come on down to the bank here and make your deposits down here, or come on down and do some expansion. Let me look at your business. You can expand here. We can make you a loan for that, and to generate new business." And he had a lot of personal contacts, a lot of business contacts. That'd be okay for him to do something like that, which he would get the bank going again, and he really didn't have anything to do, as long as they were all straight up loans. He had a lot to offer to the bank. There was a banker, and one of the other bankers at the time said that there was something about him. He said Russo could just walk up to somebody, a businessman or a individual that had substantial means, and just ask them if they would move their account to Indian Springs State Bank, and they would do it, no questions asked. Now, I'm not sure about that, but that's what one of the other bankers said. That was in there's a book out there called Inside Job by a guy named Stephen Pritzo, and it's a really it's an overview. I mean, overview. It's a really extensive look at the looting of American savings and loans back in the days, and it cost the government, it cost the taxpayers a lot of money to clean that mess up, to bail out all these banks. How many times are we going to have to keep bailing these banks out? We've done it more than once in my lifetime. So during this same time, Lemaster and Russo invited an Iranian-American businessman named Farhad Azima, who's about 40 years old, I'm a middle-aged guy, to join the bank's board of directors. And Lemaster and Russo also at the same time described themselves as advisory directors of Global International Airways, and the Global International Airways was owned by Fareed Azima. It was headquartered in Kansas City. They had a small set of offices. I remember going by them after we found out about some of this stuff and just going by and picking up some license plates. And, there wasn't really anything ever there. No, I wasn't ever any mob guys there. There wasn't anybody there, didn't seem like. But it's just, they were in a small set of offices, really, maybe 3 or 4 rooms in this little office building, in this part of this office building, and it's nondescript. It was in a strip mall. It was mainly frequented in that area by students from nearby University of Missouri, Kansas City. They had like a coffee shop across the street and a sandwich place and a Chinese restaurant, Ken Lynn's, and a pizza place. So, just a real unassuming little place. But this airline, it was making money. And it had a lot of planes. You couldn't tell by looking at this office. I know that. Now, in Prizo's book, he reveals many clues that shows that Global International Airlines was either a CIA front, owned by the CIA, or was extremely lucky in getting paid to ship guns into Africa and other secretive missions around the Middle East and places like and Central America and places like that. And remember, this is during the time of the guns for what was it? What they call that with the Contras, the guns for the Contra thing that Reagan and all those guys were involved in, and they get involved in some of that. He started this company supposedly just 3 years before this to ship cattle to Iran, and this was about the time the Shah of Iran fell, and he's out, and now he can't do business with the new government. There's no way he's going to do business with them directly. He'd borrowed a lot of money from a Saudi bank. He's one of these international entrepreneurs. He then started getting other contracts, and over the next couple of 3 years, by 82 or so, 83, Global International would become one of the nation's largest charter airlines. There's bigger passenger airlines. This is a charter airline, had 900 employees worldwide, 20 planes, had 17 707s, 2 727s, and 1 747, which is a monster. So they started making headlines right away through some, no, have that many planes and that many employees. They were doing a lot more than this. But this one situation, one of their planes got stranded for 3 days on an airfield in Tunis, Tunisia. That's North Africa, along the Mediterranean coast, right next to Egypt, I believe. In Prizo's book, he has interviewed the pilot who claimed that he'd been paid $93,000 cash in advance to deliver relief supplies. Well, now who pays somebody $93,000 in cash to deliver relief supplies? I don't think anybody would buy that story. Some reporters at the time when this started coming out asked Azima about it, and he said, these cash transactions like that, they're every day. We always do that in the international charter, the international charter business, the double not spy business, I think. But later on, after some workers has kind of, they got enough whatever oomph to get this plane going, the workers loaded cargo on the plane, and this pilot, because he knew the heat was on, I believe, he demanded to see these relief supplies. He was supposed to be flying to Nicaraguan refugees in Costa Rica. And they were labeled lettuce. Let me see the lettuce. Well, he found out this lettuce were twin-barrel 57-millimeter guns with several dozen cases of ammunition, and it was all labeled in Chinese. Reporters found Azima after that, he said that, well, global will not deliver cargo like that. If we know what that's what the contents are, we will not deliver cargo like that. Now, the Tunisian government was involved in this because as this all started falling down, they said the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or the PLO, was sending arms to the Sandinistas. So, who knows in this, like I said, this double knot spy game, who really knows what the truth is? A global crewman was interviewed, and he said it was kind of a standing joke among crews at that time that when inspectors, airport people would ask what their cargo was, he'd say, well, they're cabbages and cabbage launchers. And after this time, though, pilots said that their company stopped labeling shipments as cabbages. Then they just put Red Cross stickers over all the sides, so it looked like Red Cross supplies, which is better covered than cabbages or lettuce. Although if you got something that's will spoil, you can easier push customs people and people that want to hold you up. You can push them easier and say, hey, man, you're going to spoil, $50,000 worth of food supplies for these poor people over here. And they might let you go. It's a pretty good, both of them are pretty good scams. Now, during these next few years, everybody in the intelligence community, if they're an insider, will say, well, us global international is really like Air America, which Air America was well known at the time to be actually owned by the CIA. It's their own secret charter airline. It's an open secret at that time. But what was interesting, why Air America pilots started showing up on Global's pilot rosters and on the logs, and they would have logs that would show them flying arms and other supplies to Ecuador and Peru, and into Southeast Asia, Thailand, and Nairobi, Africa, and Pakistan, and different hotspots like that. And Azima will be asked about this later on. He'll always claim that his loads had State Department approval. When he was asked if he really worked for the CIA, he'll say, we don't knowingly work for the CIA. He never said no. Now, going back, that's a lot about Azima and his global international airways. But he and Russo are buddies during all this. Anthony Russo, remember him? He's a small-time criminal lawyer, fixer, bribes policemen, knows Civella's, knows all the mob people in Kansas City. Now he's a bank. He and Azima both are buddies, and they're also both bankers, bank officers at Indian Springs State Bank. Azima was directly involved with Indian Springs State Bank, or if he involved Global's activities in it, don't really know for sure. But here's one story where they were intertwined. Russo, during an investigation after all this, Russo had a $25,000 check from Global International. He was questioned about that check in court. He was in a trial for a tax fraud. And he gave the following explanation. He said the U.S. government had hired Global International to transport a former Army sergeant, a Liberian Army sergeant named Samuel Doe, who had, they'd had a coup, and he was now the new president of Liberia, and he had appointed his new cabinet, and they were supposed to fly Samuel Doe and his new cabinet all around the world on a goodwill tour. He said Azima asked him to go as a host to the president and his cabinet, just to escort him around, make connections for him, and just kind of be their buddy, and they'll later say to kiss his ass and keep him happy, because they want maybe some Liberian deposits, of course, like to get into some of that government money from over in Africa deposited in their bank. Russo claimed that he got the approval from the bank president, this Mr. Lemaster. And Lemaster will later agree. He said, yeah, and I covered for his duties while he went on this goodwill trip around the world, because he believed that he'd become friends with Sergeant Doe and his cabinet. And after that, from that relationship, they'd be able to get bank deposits from Liberia. And he said that $25,000, he split that fee with Russo. That $25,000 check was Russo's share of it, and Lemaster got the other part of it. And he said it was because he covered for Russo while he was gone. It's his bank director job or whatever it was. It was a no-show job. Zima will later be asked about this, and he said he just wanted Russo or somebody like that. He was real hale and hearty, well-met guy. Said he'd greet dough with a hearty high press, and he just was one of those guys that could get along with anybody. A global attorney will say Russo's main job was to keep Doe's bodyguards from showing their guns out too often when they were in these other countries. It sounds to me like just probably many months long or a month-long trip around the world to hoard and drink and party for a month or so on their librarian's dollar. And Zima, of course, he was helping out with this because they wanted that money out of librarian, wanted business out of librarian, didn't mind bribing people to get it. Um, there was a trial for tax fraud I just mentioned. Well, during that time, this Zima testified at that, and he got found. First, he got a hung jury, and then I think he got a not guilty. Yeah, he got acquitted on the third trial after 2 hung juries, and the prosecutor is really frustrated because they believe that Azima's connections to the government and references to the CIA gave him Anthony Russo, this aura of respectability. Well, during this time, the real scam at Indian Springs State Bank and other banks around the country was starting to come to light. They were figuring some stuff out, and they were using Indian Springs State Bank to do it. And I'll tell you about what that was in a minute. But what they actually placed an ad in the New York Times, the Washington Post, I think maybe the LA paper, the big city newspapers, and it said, "Money for rent. Obstacles to borrowing neutralized by having us deposit funds in your local bank. New turnstile approach to financing. Right to Fund, Suite 311, 1001 Franklin Avenue, Garden City, New York." People rent money? What? WTF? I mean, people go around renting money to banks to then loan out? I don't know. I'm not a high finance guy. Maybe somebody out there can explain that one to me. Now, you remember the Teamsters loans that were obtained by casino owners who knew they had to kick back cash to mobsters. Mobsters had already pressured the pension funds to make those loans to people who may not be able to pay them back, weren't the best risk. Remember the Shawnee Mission State Bank officer who made loans to mob associates who shared the majority of loan money back to the mob and just kept a little piece of it? Well, it's along those same lines. They rented money to a financial institution. At the same time, people or businesses would appear and they want to borrow money at the same time, and they'd agree to pay a really high rate of interest and some extra fees. Because, see, these new borrowers, they were straw borrowers. They didn't care how much the bank charged as fees or interest or anything about that. And once they got the money, they'd been sent there by LeMaster, Russo, and some other people that got involved with this on the national basis. And then, of course, borrowers evaporate, and the loans are never repaid. Pretty soon, the people that lease their money want their money back along with their rental fee. They say, "Hey, it's not my fault you made bad loans to people that didn't repay them. The rental time's up. Give me my money back. Pay me my rental fee." So on the local level, Azima also had other connections to the Indian State Bank. He recommended that the bank loan $200,000 to the Dunes Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. It's an unsecured loan, which like all these others were, and it was going to be for $200,000, and it was going to be guaranteed by Dunes owner Morris Shanker. Now, Morris Shanker is the same St. Louis lawyer who owned the Dunes, but he also is the same guy who stiffed Alan Dorfman on his finder's fee for a pension fund loan to the Dunes Casino. Listen to this clip of Joey Lombardo, the Chicago outfit capo, threatening Shanker to pay that money back as Shanker is refusing to pay it back.
I was to Chicago. Yeah, you know what I mean when he drives to Chicago. Should have been off the pot, you know? We either give him got coming or we never give him got coming. Because wherever he's got coming, all that comes to the people here. So, you have to find a way to pay it. The nicest guy in the world, and on the other hand, nobody's going to make me do anything. I never did business with him. That's true. I did business with Hopper, then he did it with him. I did it with Hopper, and Hopper said, "You it is." Excuse me, I'm just here to bring a message back. You can fight the system if you want it. But I'll tell you one thing. You serve your 72 and you defy it, all you can do is send a guy to beat it to him. One guy. If you don't own that, you got nothing to worry about. You reach 73 then. There's no problem. Listen, you're a lawyer. You've been around St. Louis a long time. You got folks to go for help. I was not that type of a guy. But the people got a piece of him. I'm that type of a guy. You know what I mean?
I know there is no organized crime or any hidden interest in the Dunes Hotel. I'm willing to stake my life, my reputation, and everything I've got on that statement. But I'll tell you this. I'm opposed to organized crime, not only in Las Vegas, I'm opposed to it in every manner, shape, or form.
Shanker will eventually declare bankruptcy and be millions and millions of dollars that he'll get discharged. I think $197 million in bank loans and savings and loans, pension fund loans. Their whole, it was bad. The IRS said actually at that time he owed $66 million in taxes. Regulators looked at that loan and Indian State Bank books and they said you need to collect on that and get him out of there. That guy's not credit worthy, but nothing ever happened. It was never paid back. Nothing ever happened. Now Morris Shanker was an associate of Nick Civella in Kansas City, and when bank regulators started looking at the books, they discovered that the Indian Springs State Bank had loaned other members of the Civella family money on unsecured loans. We go back to the Shawnee State Bank, same deal. They learned that most of these loans were part of the new business Tony Russo was bringing into the bank. Actually, different mob guys got a total of $400,000 in loans from the Indian Springs State Bank. One was even for an Italian restaurant. I don't remember what the restaurant was. It probably didn't last any time. Maybe they never even opened it. Their accounts were always overdrawn. They weren't paying them back. They weren't making their payments. One thing they did, regulators caught was there was a loan to Nick Civella that he wasn't making any payments, but they kept it current by just keep rolling it over and renewing it. And they increased the amount of the loan at each renewal and to cover the interest rates, the interest costs that they had never paid. But, eventually it's just, he's going to die. He's going to go to jail and die, and he's never going to pay that back either. Same time, Indian Springs is making these sweetheart loans to members of the Civella crime family. The Civellas are embroiled in a criminal prosecution in Kansas City. If you remember that, they indicted Nick and Carl Civella and Charlie Mortina and Tufty Luna and some others for skimming from the Tropicana, and then later the second trial will be from the Stardust, part of the whole caper that was in the Casino movie. I know you all have seen Casino. Nick will die of cancer before that trial's over. His brother Carl, is convicted and he dies in prison. Now, here's another guy that had a loan to the Indian Springs State Bank that never got paid back. Carl Caruso, they called him the singer on the wiretaps. He operated junkets to Las Vegas and the Dunes and other casinos, and he was the bag man for the skimming operation. He was transporting the skim from the Trop back to Kansas City, and that's the one they caught him with $80,000. He had $40,000 in one pocket and $40,000 in the other, just inside of his coat pocket. And when they took him off at the airport and arrested him, he just pulled it out and laid it on the table. These were all near perfect scams. They had all these phony borrows. They had the banks rigged on a national basis. They were even putting money into these savings and loans. And on a national basis, they were getting rent money to the banks and then sending their own people in to borrow that money back and never paying it back, giving the bulk of the money that they borrowed back to the criminals. Then pretty soon the people that put the money into the bank wanted their money back. They had a deal with the bank, and the bank was legitimate, and they're going to have to give the money back plus pay the interest rate or the fee for renting the money, however they couch that. And on a local basis, all the mob guys are going over there getting these loans that they are never intended on paying back because they had the bank wired. So anyhow, that's a story about how the mafia got involved in the savings and loan scams and scandals of the 1980s. So thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate everybody who's listening and watching. Don't forget, I like to ride motorcycles, so watch out for motorcycles when you're on the street driving your F-150, your Denali, De Niro, and all that kind of stuff. Those things are huge, man. You put a motorcycle up between that and a big truck, and it's pretty scary sometimes. If you have a problem with the PTSD and you've been in the service, be sure to go to that VA website and get that hotline number. If you have a problem with drugs or alcohol, VA will help you. But if you're not been in the service, then you can go to Anthony Russo down in Florida, and he's got a hotline on his website. If you want to read some good mob books, I've got 3 out there. I've got the Windy City Mafia, the Chicago outfit. I've got Big Apple Mafia, the New York's 5 family stories from the podcast. You may recognize some of them. And then I've got my Leaving Vegas, how FBI wiretaps ended mob domination in Las Vegas casinos, which tells all about the skimming investigation from the Kansas City and what we saw and what we did here in Kansas City. Not particularly what Lefty did out there and that soap opera stuff with Sharon Stone and Jill, I think, whatever his real wife's name was. And Tony Spilotro, I know he's real popular to read about and learn about. Learn about this from the Kansas City side of this whole story. And it was a heck of a story. It was one heck of a story that the FBI took down these guys. And like, really, if you think about it, historically, they irrevocably changed the Teamsters Union, for good or for bad. I don't know. But in the end, they caused the Teamsters Union to be taken over by a trusteeship and the pension fund all be taken over, and good legitimate people being installed, especially after Jimmy Hoffa died. They were and everybody had gone to jail by then. I mean, all the upper echelon of the Teamsters and the mob that were into the Teamster racketeering, they all went to jail during these years. Don't forget, I have this YouTube channel. Like and subscribe. Put it on your social media. Put links to your social media. Tell your friends about it. Same way with the audio podcast. You can put a link on your social media. So help me out by just telling other people about it. It helps immensely. Thanks a lot, guys. 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 Immensely.